So we are back here at the Enlightened Millennial Studios.
Welcome back, everybody. Sunday, September 27th to 2020, man. We have a special guest on. Super excited to have you, man.
So for people, there's some people, and we were talking a little about the podcast earlier, who have been with us for a long time. So Leo and I started this podcast about 2 years ago now.
2018.
And we've had a lot of episodes, man. And you were actually one of our first guests that we brought on the show, because Leo and I do a lot of podcasting solo. Mm-hmm. I think that separates us from a lot of other podcasts. We don't have a lot of guests on because we're really selective who we bring on. Mm-hmm. And you were one of our initial early guests, if you remember, and that was the first time I met you, man.
Yeah, I think that was the first time we met, and it was actually in this apartment as well, and just background was a little different.
yeah.
But it's also good to see, that we do keep in touch outside of the set or outside of this, and just talking to you. You're just super smart, intelligent. You have a lot of, just have a different perspective on just what's going on and stuff that I don't even think about. So when we talk all the time, it's just.
Because I remember the first time we were actually down at the playing some pool, and Leo told me about a friend that he had met on a bus ride, and he's like, "Yeah, this guy, man, he is so intelligent."
Yeah,
this guy is. I sat next to him, and this guy is super intelligent. And I was like, "Leo, what are you waiting for? Let's invite him to the show." So I was sitting next to Leo, and he texted you, called you right then. He's like, "You got to be on the show." And I had never met you, and then over time, since we did that first episode, you've become one of my best friends here in Boston, and like a brother. So this is great. So part of what we do at the EM, like we always say, we practice what we preach, and all of our guests that we have on, they become close friends of ours, and I think that's what makes us special. But for people who are tuning in, because we got a lot of new people tuning in since last few months, tell them a little bit about yourself, man, and just a little bit about your background, and just kind of shooting shit a little bit, and let people know more about what is the inner workings of a Moog.
Sure, thank you. Firstly, Brady, Leo, it's always great to be in conversation with friends and good friends, old friends. And thank you so much for the kind words. Just a little bit about myself. I work in economic consulting for antitrust litigation. Basically, doing the economics behind antitrust lawsuits, evaluating allegations, understanding how certain transactions, certain business conduct could impact competitive markets. Well, that's what I do. That's what I occupy myself majority of the time. I also, there's some overlap between economics and politics, and which is where my interest comes in. I'm deeply fascinated by foreign policy, military strategy, defense doctrine, national security related issues, and of course, and their intersection with law, economics, and politics.
Mm-hmm. Even hearing this, from 2 years ago, I remember you were just graduating too.
Yeah.
The very first conversation that I had sitting next to Moog on the bus, we were going into New York for something, and I remember that was the last seat there, and I was like, oh man, who do I have to sit next to?
Yeah, actually tell that story a little bit.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story.
Well, so it was for I think a Buddhist event or something, and I was late. I was the last one getting on the bus, and I was like, oh man, there's no seats here. What weirdo am I gonna be sitting next to? And I saw that one seat there, and I saw you. I was like, oh man, who is this guy? So I sat down next to him. I was like, hey, what's up, man? And we just instantly kind of bonded, and I like the way you, because I'm always into economics, and I just like to know and learn a little bit more about it. It's not my field or anything, but the way you just related it to life and economics is the same, and you just painted a really nice picture for me. And I was like, oh man, we need to have you on the show so you can just explain your how you formulated it, and that was nice.
The economic lens is a wonderful lens to look at the world through, and it does a good job of understanding costs, incentives, structure, with the ultimate goal being efficiency. And I think in more formal mathematical economics, it's the study of causality, what causes what economic outcome, if there is simultaneous causality. There are different, very intuitive ideas that are easily applicable, transferable to other parts of life, and that's why I find economics really fascinating. Mm-hmm. And there's a prequel to the story that you just mentioned. So I was the last person to get onto the bus, and the only seat available was the seat right next to you, if you remember. Mm. But before I even got onto the bus, I actually met a friend of mine who was like in charge of the bus that we were on, and he said, "Hey, you know what bus are you on?" And I said, "Whatever, some bus number." And he said, "Well, you know, you should be on my bus." I was like, "Okay." I mean, I'm agnostic to which bus I'm going to be getting onto, whatever. And then he switched me over to the bus that went to the one that I jumped on, and I was the last person to get on. The only seat available was right next to you, and that's how we met. Like, it was a strange sequence of events, and just like I was getting onto the other bus, in fact, and if I didn't change my mind last minute.
Good choice though. Amazing that we met.
That's why we are all here.
Yeah,
absolutely. We've kept a good friendship. We talk about a place. I think this place should actually give us a little bit of sponsorship, money, which is Yvonne's. We talk about Yvonne's a lot, and it's become like, I've had a couple people text me and is like, "Hey man, you guys talk about this place. What is this Yvonne's?" I got a couple people that like, "Hey man, I want to come down to Boston. I want to see Yvonne." So Yvonne's through this podcast has gotten a lot of free advertising. Yeah. But so this is that's one of your spots, man, right?
Yeah, I like Yvonne's. They've got some excellent cocktails, and recently I've also come to realize that the food that they make there is pretty amazing.
Have you had dinner there?
Yeah, I've had dinner there. I've had dinner there a couple of times, yeah. Usually what happens is that I get there at a time when the kitchen's closed. So
I assume you haven't been back in a while because
no, obviously, and like they don't have any open windows, and I'm
freaks you out.
Nervous about the circulation, but apart from that, it's an excellent place, and I would definitely go back there when things.
Yeah, and it's a good spot because it's close by to here, and Amog and I have met up a few times, so we shoot the shit. And the good thing about us is we like having good conversations, and part of Enlightened Millennial is perspectives, and I say this almost all the time. Like, our goal here is never to tell people to preach like you need to believe this or that. This is not a opinion, political, like op-ed show or anything like this. This is a perspective show where we want to give you a new perspective, and you can take it, leave it. But I always tell people, when you have a new idea, wrestle with it, think about it, and then maybe something new will emerge, and that's what we need in this country and throughout society, where people debate new ideas, and I think that's awesome. So, Leo and I created this platform. I couldn't give Leo enough credit, but he's the one who actually came up with the idea. He's the one who came up with the name, the Enlightened Millennial. That's Leo's name. He came up with it, and the concept always was that we have conversations on here, and people leave with a new perspective that they never thought about before, and they're like, "Wow, that's cool." We don't ask them to agree with us. Yeah. We ask them that they think about it and wrestle with it. So, today, there's so many things that we can talk about with you, Mo, because you're obviously a friend. But I wanted to delve a little bit into, when it comes to foreign policy and international relations, and you have an interest in that, and you have a perspective about, what's going on outside of the U.S., what's going on, for example, in a country like China, and I think it's very salient to talk about it as opposed to what's going on, everything in the country. So I want you to kind of wrestle with that a little bit, man. So first of all, let's talk about China. Let's weigh the factors. Let's hear your opinion about it, and why do you think we should pay attention to it in the first place?
So, I mean, just off the bat, the rise of China is not a new idea. People have been talking about it for some time. It's been the object of a lot of research. It's been the object of a lot of intellectual thinking. A lot of public debate, and of course, government policy has gone into thinking about China, especially because it is like a known rising power, right? But in present times, I think it takes a different level of relevance, and it can take like a defense, national security, almost existential dimension, which people should think very deeply about, especially in the West, given that as a political structure, China is very different in comparison to a lot of other parts of the world, and definitely starkly different when you compare it to a place like the United States. And with respect to the coronavirus, one thing that I found somewhat insightful was China's opportunity to collaborate with the world. This is something that China could have used as being a tool to demonstrate that hey, we understand that we're a rising power. We understand that this creates like regional instability, regional insecurity, and there are known friction points like Hong Kong, Taiwan, even North Korea and South Korea's relations, where there is obviously a difference of opinion between the West and the People's Republic of China. But the coronavirus is something that unifies humanity as something that is going to be equally detrimental to person A in country A and person B in country B. And the Chinese Communist Party could have, used this opportunity to show that they're here to collaborate, cooperate and contribute to a multipolar world where, there is capacity for 2 great powers or 3 great powers or 4 great powers or n number of great powers in different realms, different respect to exist, right? China is the biggest manufacturer of the world. The US is the biggest consumer in the world. And the relationship between these two countries pretty much decides global commerce, decides whether trade is going to be costly or is it going to be affordable, whether innovation is going to be collaborative or is it going to be competitive, things like that. And yeah, and I think that the fact that the US was already involved in China skepticism may have contributed to the Chinese Communist Party not cooperating. But of course, the coronavirus is such a fundamental health problem, public health risk, that I feel that politics should have transcended, and that the common sense should have transcended politics, and that didn't happen. And we now know that there's been suppression of crucial information.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it becomes more relevant, right? Thinking about how we want to deal with China and its rise, its insecurities, its expansionist policies, and in some cases, its contribution to innovation.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point that you mentioned. So, this is again a big theme that we have on here is the question of leadership. How are you going to lead? If you want to be a great power, whether it's in business, in your own life, in family, whatever, or even in international relations, how are you going to rise to that power, and how are you going to lead? And I think a great point that you made here is that this was an opportunity potentially for, China is obviously wants to be a superpower. Some argue that they already are. And so did they miss out on an opportunity here where they could have stepped up and say, hey, we are going to take more responsibility. We're going to collaborate with the world. And that way we are going to show that we are a real superpower. Or is that something from the past? Because, I would argue after World War II, the U.S. became a superpower. And part of the reason why people throughout the West looked up to the United States is because the United States played a crucial role in getting Europe out of a misery that was World War II. And America led as an example. And a lot of, I grew up in Europe. And for the most part, you grow up in Europe, everyone says, wow, America helped us during the war. And we have a very positive view. This might have changed the last few years, but we have a very positive view about America, about helping us out during what was one of the biggest humanitarian crises that we've ever faced. And America stepped in and they helped us out, get out of it. And so we looked at America as okay, now you're ready to lead. And so the question that I have for you, and which I feel like what you're trying to say here is that kind of leadership not present anymore. Do we not want to do that anymore? Is it more of a zero-sum game?
I think it's always been a zero-sum game, and you have periods of a period where you have a single superpower like the United States, dominate global politics, military relations, power balances across the world, is actually the exception and not the rule. I think in my reading of world history, I would say that we are more likely to have a multipolar world than a unipolar world, and I think that balance is being restored with the rise of Russia, not Russia, but rise of China, and I guess the new Russia has a collaborative value to the rise of China, for example, and so the role that the U.S. played after World War II, in my opinion, is definitely being eroded, right? The maintaining, some kind of structure, rule of law based international relations, that's definitely being eroded. You can see that America has decided to withdraw troops from Germany, has already withdrawn troops from Syria, and this creates like obviously a power vacuum. Other regional players like Iran, with the help of Russia, Syria, enter these battlefields, and of course American interests are potentially compromised, and so on and so forth. And that takes like a different dimension when it comes to countries like China, which may not be directly involved in these military conflicts in the Middle East, but they are economically involved. They have their allies and friends that are maintaining strong positions that are at the detriment of American interests, right? That's the zero-sum nature of it. Like, right. The fact that as soon as America recedes from a certain forward position where its interests are, where it's trying to maintain its interests, that vacuum is almost always absorbed by anti-America, forces, or forces that definitely don't protect American interests in the region. So that's the zero-sum nature of the game.
Right.
It's never the case that where the US cedes some advantage, that advantage does not result, that ceding of advantage doesn't result in someone else taking over.
And that's the perverse nature of it.
Yeah,
because the U.S. concept is like, we want to be able to withdraw so you can govern yourself, but when we withdraw, we make the region very unstable, and that's like the perverse part of this, right? Yeah. So we want people to self-govern, but then they're like, okay, let's self-govern, and then there's obviously a lot of issues that come out of it. So but yeah, I mean, Leo, take a stab at this.
I think my role here in listening to this conversation and engaging in this conversation is like, why would I care, and why do these topics really matter to the everyday person, and like, how can we put things into perspective so that, not because we were talking before earlier, and some of the like facts and topics that we were talking about, like, wow, like actually that I should look at this, or I should pay attention to this, but because I'm so absorbed in my own like businesses or my own like getting ahead in life, I won't focus on this too much. But I love talking to you about these things because it just sheds light on it, and you put things into you make it sound really easily to understand and very easily digestible. So I'm just curious, like, what does this mean for the everyday person in 5 years or now, or like, what are things to focus on? And because we spoke about media before, and the TV and news, and just what's real and what's not, and what is important and what's not important. That's how I see it.
I'll frame that also a little bit, because when it comes to a lot of our audience, I think they're obviously looking for more. They're looking for a new perspective. That's why to listen to EM. You're not going to listen to EM if you want to just consume like, People Magazine. This is a little bit different.
Yeah.
So I guess like the big question here is like, why should we care? And that's, I guess, where Leo's coming from. And I have a very specific answer to that, but I want you to take a stab at that. Why care about international relations now more than ever?
I mean, see, I personally feel it's not about now more than ever. I think that you can't put a price on I wouldn't say enlightenment completely, but yeah, it is a form of enlightenment to have an understanding of the world around you. And at least for like, I'm assuming here that the audience actually is largely a millennial audience, and for a millennial audience, I think it's important to take control of their lives in the present circumstances, because it seems like it could descend into everyone for themselves, in one sense.
Yeah.
So if you are unaware of like the macroeconomic factors that influence the capital markets, for example, then you're basically shutting yourself from a lot of opportunities that you might have in developing your personal finance. Just like a basic example, because Leo, I'm just like thinking from what the question that Leo asked was to the common person who's trying to like get through day-to-day life. Why are these questions and these topics important? And I think it's important because if you can't see the big picture, which is the international relations field, foreign policy field, you're unlikely to really understand what's actually happening on the ground as well.
Exactly.
Right, but we have to make it tangible, though, right? So, I mean, this glass, this shirt, you driving a truck, the gas price you pay, my clothes, when you're downloading software, the fact that we're wearing, a face covering or as I call it, a diaper on our face, like every single thing, how long like we're gonna stay shut down, how is it gonna, everything is actually results in one way or the other, directly or indirectly, with international relations.
Yeah,
and that is where I think it's tangible.
Yeah, so I guess like also one of the questions, like everybody listening to this right here, September 2020, what is actually going on? Like what is happening? Like what is really going on? And I'm not into international relations. I'm not really much into politics because this shit makes me mad. But just having a real conversation about this, like it sheds really like just clear light to me, and I'm like, this is okay. Now I'm enlightenment just on the spot.
Yeah, well, let's get to that, man. So let's look at what has happened, what has transpired with the world's changed. So now, no matter where you are in the world, and this is obviously like something where like we can really feel it and see it. And like for a lot of people, international relations is such an abstract concept. They don't, even though like trade wars affect every single person in the country, we don't feel it. But now we're like, we talked about not being able to go to Yvonne's, we talked about face coverings, we talked about like we can't even do this podcast outside. So like our life is totally disrupted. And so I wanted you to pick at that a little bit. Like we'll talk about like China and like how this has been affected and some of the information that you have, which I think is interesting for viewers to get that perspective on at least.
So I mean, I guess I'm just going to rephrase your question as the impact of COVID-19 on the world and how it relates to China, right? In one sense.
Yeah, because we're talking about big numbers, right? I'm pulling here the numbers from Reuters. GDP fell at a 32.9% annualized rate, right? The deepest decline since 1947, which was the end of World War II. 30.2 million Americans were receiving unemployment checks in the week ending in July 11th. This is the biggest blow to the U.S. economy since the Great Depression, and this is a massive problem. So how did we get here? And one thing for me is like, I'm a businessman. That's my perspective. And so when issues happen, what's my job? My job is to put out fires. You run a large business and you're like, problems will arise. And I have a couple ways how to deal with problems. Number one is I need to identify why did this happen. I need to solve the problem. I need to put out the fire. I need to prevent it from happening in the future. And I think right now where the mass media is about like putting out fire. Okay, we wear a mask, vaccine. Okay, cool. But what about in the future? Like, can this happen again? What caused this? And I feel like that conversation is totally absent because it's so politicized, which is we want to remove all that. But like I can't solve a problem in a business when there's a massive issue that occurred, and I'm like, okay, guys, call the firefighter. Like, we had a fire in our apartment. Okay, firefighter. Every 2 months, a firefighter comes. Like, guys, why is this fire happening? Are we living in a wrong home? Who's setting this fire? Like, what's going on? So you can't solve a problem without identifying the issue and without having a plan for how to mitigate it in the future. And I think those mitigation and prevention and like understanding the problem, these are not being discussed. And I think where you have a viewpoint on it is that you have a specific view about like where this might have come from. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit.
Well, so I actually prescribe to like Eric Weinstein's view on the virus, and like he.
You want to give people a little bit of a background?
He's
for people who don't know.
I mean, he's just. I would say he's a notable public intellectual. He appears on reputable, credible podcasts and platforms discussing issues that affect human life, and of course he has a brilliant academic background, and like so without going astray, like what he said was that when he looked at the virus and basically the genetic code of the virus, he felt that it would be highly unlikely for such a pattern to emerge naturally, meaning to say that the spike proteins are exactly or compatible with the dimensions that they lock onto the human cell easily, the respiratory cells easily, things like that. Where he was particularly surprised that this could have emerged naturally. So he probably, and I sort of was prescribed to that view as well, that it's probably developed artificially. It has some features that demonstrate that this could have been spliced in a lab. And it could have either whether it was accidentally leaked or whether it was leaked intentionally, of course, is up for debate. But what is true is that we also find ourselves in a position of a new Cold War, with China, for example, the West finds itself in that kind of a dynamic where the aggressor is also the same entity that is responsible for the rapid spread of the virus. And the fact that there's limited cooperation and limited intention to help others out exacerbates the trust deficit.
But why not? Why not? So I mean, a way to solve this problem. So for example, let's talk about antivirus companies.
Yeah.
So on a computer, it's very well known. What you do is you spread a virus on a computer, and then you immediately have a pop-up say, "Hey, do you want to download this antivirus?" And then you download the antivirus. You pay $15, and you can get rid of the virus. But who had the virus in the first place? It was the same company that's selling you the antivirus. But in this case, what I find strange is that so China's, let's say that there is elements within China that have released and unleashed this virus, and from my understanding, look, if it's hypothetically speaking, that happened. Yeah. Hypothetically speaking, if this was leaked from a lab, there is a period of time where they could have intervened and they could have warned people about this happening. There is a time lag before a virus really spreads.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. Okay, so why not take a role as China and say, okay, we also are going to find you the cure, because this would be a perfect opportunity for them. It's like the antivirus issue, and I'm using that because everyone knows that on their computer. If you have a PC, if you had a PC from 1999 to 2010, you know this happens. Every time I turn my PC, I go on a website, I see 50 pop-ups, and it's download this antivirus. And I was like, you're the one who's sending me the pop-up, and you have the solution and the problem. In this case, China has a problem, but they're not coming with a solution. And for me, this is the enigma about it.
See, there's so many things, right? I mean, that's where I agree that, it seems less likely that this was intentional, but they're definitely using it to their advantage, in terms of political relations and international relations. The thing is that, okay, let's come back to the initial point, the Chinese Communist Party and to your point, whether they could have created this issue and then also provided the solution, things like that. See, I don't know if that's always the consideration, because it could have been the case that this is just an embarrassment, right? They
think they're too smart for that, but yeah.
This could they have a human-to-human transmission of a virus that is going unchecked and is rampant, and took them a lot of time to understand what it is and acknowledge it. And they also have probably a consideration not to panic anyone, but that is inconsistent with how the Communist Party actually operates.
Well, that's my point. That's my point.
So that's even if you give them every benefit of the doubt, we still know for a fact that as back as August of 2019, even Chinese search engines like Baidu.
Okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about it. So let's go there.
I was just saying that when you look at the search query in data, and it seems people were actually searching for the symptoms of the virus as early as August of 2019. These are this is well known, and I think Harvard has gone and backed this analysis as well. They looked at satellite images of Wuhan parking lots and found that they were statistically significant and higher increase in the number of vehicles in Wuhan hospital parking lots as early as August and September of 2019, and this is good.
That's crazy though, because
6 months before the lockdown, 6-7 months. So if you can imagine, if they had any information that there is human-to-human transmission, and they withheld that information from the world, from the WHO, then I would consider that as being not only
grossly negligent.
Grossly negligent, and I think it would be criminal for the world not to know about that, or that yeah.
So, but
for it to be kept from the world, yeah.
So you said it's common, but this is the first time I'm hearing it, and I'm sure anybody listening is maybe like, what? As early as August 2019. That's a year ago.
This is one study. It may not be. Granted, it may not be peer reviewed, and of course, China is not a non-entity in global politics. So, any kind of accusation of that nature will probably be downplayed in the interest of global cooperation. But yeah, that's but that's like mainstream media in general, right? It's more about the news and not about the impact that news can make on people. And unfortunately, like, we are because of the present circumstances, almost everyone is just reliant on information that they get from their screens, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably one of the reasons why you may not be following. It might be either information overload, where you have a tsunami of issues that are being discussed in the media, and you can't like sort of differentiate between what is actually a long-term threat or what is a short-term threat, what is an electoral threat, what is a political threat, what's a military threat, and public health threat. How do you find the right way of mitigating these threats?
Yeah.